Antares, the first monarch born from the darkness and the strongest of his kind, was a being who embodied terror and destruction. Known as the Dragon King, he commanded the respect and fear of all who recognized his unparalleled power. He ruled over dragons and stood as the mightiest among the monarchs. While preparing to invade Earth alongside an army of 10 million soldiers hidden within the rift between dimensions, something unimaginable occurred. Antares opened his eyes to find himself in a strange vessel, a frail human body. He had no idea how it had happened, but he discovered he also possessed the memories of the human he now inhabited. Driven by curiosity and disbelief, he searched for a mirror and was confronted by the reflection of his new form. The sight shocked him. A weak and pitiful figure stared back. This body belonged to Jinwoo, a young E-rank hunter from the Republic of Korea. From the human's memories, Antares learned that Jinwoo lived a life of constant struggle, facing danger despite his lack of talent and power. His reason for persisting as a hunter became clear. It was for his mother, who suffered from an illness he desperately sought to cure. Antares scoffed at the simplicity of the situation. With his magic, such an illness could be erased in an instant, but his musings were interrupted by the sudden vibration of a device on the desk. A phone. Picking it up, he heard the urgent voice of a woman on the other end, her tone brimming with concern. From Jinwoo's memories, Antares recognized the woman as an employee of the association. She questioned Jinwoo's absence from an upcoming raid, her voice pressing for an explanation. As Antares moved to dismiss the call, the woman's next words struck a nerve. She questioned if he would be late again, implying incompetence and unreliability. The mere thought of being associated with such weakness enraged Antares. To him, lateness was a sign of inadequacy, something utterly beneath the dignity of the Dragon King. Antares stood holding the phone as a voice on the other end questioned his location. The tone carried an air of frustration, but Antares paid it no mind. With his unparalleled perception, he scanned the city and easily pinpointed the woman's location. In mere seconds, he was there. The association employee barely had time to lower the phone from her ear before Jinwoo appeared before her, his sudden arrival startling her. Her reaction amused Antares, but his focus was singular. He questioned her, ensuring he wasn't late for the raid. The woman stammered out a response, shaken but clear. He was on time. Satisfied, Antares released his hold on her shoulders and shifted his attention to the gathering hunters. The group was chatting casually, holding steaming cups of coffee that sent a rich aroma wafting through the crisp air. The smell caught Antares' attention, igniting an unexpected curiosity. He decided he wanted to try this coffee. Turning back to an association employee, he noticed the man growing pale as he nervously explained that there was none left for him. Antares dismissed the apology, his gaze locking onto the cup the employee was holding. Without hesitation, he snatched the drink from the startled man before he could react. Antares chugged the liquid in one swift motion, its sweetness catching him off guard. The hunter, flustered and unnerved by the imposing figure before him, quickly fled without protest. Amused, Antares let out a hearty laugh. To him, this act of taking was nothing more than natural, a reminder of the survival of the fittest. Observing the reactions of those around him, he noted their unease. Whispers floated in the air as the hunters exchanged glances, commenting on how different Jinwoo seemed that day. His eyes, his presence, it all felt unsettling to them. Antares paid no attention to the murmurs. His focus shifted to the looming gate before them, the swirling energy within marking the entrance to the raid. The hunters began stretching and warming up, preparing themselves for what awaited inside. Antares' gaze sharpened as he stood before the gate. There was something peculiar about it, something that stirred his senses. Gates on Earth were creations of the rulers, yet the faint but distinct energy of a monarch seeped from this one. The anomaly demanded investigation. Without hesitation, he signaled his intent to join the raid. The group, though uneasy from the ominous aura of the gate, moved forward, entering its swirling energy. The tension thickened as they stepped inside. The dungeon greeted them with a sudden ambush of magical beasts, decoys meant to obscure the true purpose of the lair. Antares, however, dispatched them with effortless precision. His movements were too swift for the hunters to follow, leaving them awestruck by his power. Despite their murmurs about his unusual behavior, Antares remained focused. Clearing the beasts quickly, he found a hidden entrance that seemed to pulse with deeper mystery. Deciding the course without consulting the group, he advanced. When one hunter hesitated, raising a suggestion for a vote, Antares silenced him with a single decisive punch. The hunter collapsed to the ground, unconscious. As Antares addressed the rest with an unspoken challenge, none dared to oppose him. The path ahead ahead seemed endless, a winding tunnel that eventually opened into a massive door, a feature uncommon in dungeons. The hunters hesitated, unnerved by the sight. Antares too sensed a formidable energy within, but his confidence remained unshaken. Grabbing the nearest hunter, he hurled them into the room. Their frantic thrashing on the floor revealed no immediate threats, prompting Antares to step inside. The room resembled an ancient temple, its air thick with age and mystery. The hunters trickled in behind him, their movements clumsy as they fumbled to examine the surroundings. Antares, however, closed his eyes and extended his senses, quickly identifying the source of the energy. A statue of an angel holding a stone slate. Its presence radiated importance. The hunters gathered near the statue, intrigued by the mysterious runes carved into the slate. Antares' voice broke the uncertainty as he read the text aloud. The commandments of the Kartanon Temple. The commandment spoke of worship, praise, and proof of faith, each decree heavier than the last. The final warning was chilling. Failure to obey would not be spared. As Antares finished reading, a sudden intense light burst forth. The red beam shot from the eyes of a colossal statue at the temple's far end, its energy crackling with lethal intent. The hunters froze in fear as the beam illuminated the room with a searing brilliance, signaling that the trial of the temple had begun. Antares stood firm as the beam of red light surged toward him. He made no attempt to dodge or block the attack, meeting it with an air of defiance. To him, the power behind the beam was insignificant, far weaker than the breath of an ancient dragon. With a smirk of disdain, he summoned his own might, releasing the devastating breath of destruction. The blast from his mouth tore through the air, obliterating the massive angel statue in an instant, its head crumbling to dust. The room erupted in chaos as the statues lining the walls came to life, their purpose revealed. They ignored the terrified hunters, moving with singular focus toward Antares. But to the monarch of destruction, they were nothing more than fragile puppets. He relished the challenge, smashing them apart with his bare hands. One after another, the statues shattered under his strength, their remains scattering across the temple floor. The sound of cracking stone echoed as Antares moved with unstoppable force. The hunters could only cower in fear, dodging the flying debris as they questioned the strange commandments and the madness unfolding before them. But Antares paid them no mind. The statues, mere distractions, were obliterated before the hunters' cries had even faded. To him, the battle wasn't even worthy of warming up his immense power. As the dust settled, the angel statue holding the stone slate rose, its fury evident. It roared in defiance, yet Antares silenced it with a swift and deadly move. Grabbing a spear from the wreckage of a shattered statue, he hurled it with precision. The spear pierced the angel's neck, silencing its hollow words forever. Antares demanded more, a true opponent, not a decoy. Then, as if answering his challenge, the giant headless statue that had been standing silent rose to its feet. Its sheer size and the ominous energy radiating from it commanded the room's attention. Antares grinned, his blood surging with anticipation. The statue loomed over him, its power undeniable, but Antares was undeterred. This was the kind of battle he craved. The statue's voice boomed, declaring that their ill-fated connection would end here. Shadows swirled around it, expanding as the room darkened under the crushing weight of its presence. Antares responded in kind, unleashing his overwhelming aura to match the immense power before him. With relentless speed, he charged at the statue. The statue, unwilling to back down, retaliated with equally thunderous force. The thrill of battle surged through Antares as he prepared to engage in a clash of titans. Just then, Jinwoo jolted awake. His breathing was heavy, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the familiar surroundings of his bedroom, the bed, the walls, the ceiling, and his computer. It was his home, quiet and ordinary. Realizing he had been dreaming, Jinwoo exhaled sharply. The vivid memory of being the Dragon King lingered, leaving him unsettled. Checking the time on his phone, Jinwoo let out a sigh of relief. There was still plenty of time before the exam. Shaking off the remnants of the dream, he tried to refocus, but the weight of the strange experience lingered, refusing to be forgotten. Lee Se-hwan, a new investigator in the Seoul Central Police Station's Violent Crimes Unit, had heard a persistent rumor even before he joined the force. It was the kind of story that grew to legendary proportions among law enforcement. There was said to be a detective in the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit known as the Phantom. The tales painted the Phantom as a near mythical figure, a man who closed every case he touched, even ones long considered unsolvable. His arrest rate was said to be a staggering 200%, and criminals, no matter how violent or hardened, friend, supposedly became meek in his presence. The story spoke of his refusal to accept promotions, claiming he chose to stay in the field rather than rise in rank. Though Sehwan doubted the truth of some details, he couldn't deny the reputation the Phantom carried. If even a fraction of the rumors were true, this detective was a paragon of their profession. Sehwan was both excited and nervous when he learned he would be transferred to the Violent Crimes Unit. He couldn't help but feel a pang of envy as his colleagues congratulated him. Working alongside the Phantom felt like stepping into the pages of a storybook legend. Sehwan scanned the room nervously, wondering if one of them was the Phantom. Each face seemed to hold a story, their gazes scrutinizing him as though assessing his worth. He couldn't help but ask about Detective Sung, the man he was supposed to work with. The detective laughed, confirming that Detective Sung was indeed the Phantom. The nickname wasn't just about his skill, but also his ability to appear and disappear like a ghost, a reputation that had spread far beyond their precinct. Before Sehwan could fully process this, the detective gestured toward the hallway. A tall man entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Though his height was unremarkable by Korean standards, there was something about him that made Sehwan feel as though the room itself shrank in his presence. This was Detective Sung, the Phantom. Meeting Detective Sung Jinwoo in person, Sehwan realized the nickname Phantom wasn't simply about Sung's mysterious ability to appear and disappear, or his knack for solving cases. It was the sheer presence the man commanded. His aura seemed to dominate the space, and even seasoned officers appeared small in comparison. From the moment Jinwoo greeted Sehwan and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, it was clear that the rookie's training had begun. Jinwoo's calm yet firm demeanor didn't need words to convey authority. He led Sehwan out of the office, not with orders, but with a silent expectation that the rookie would follow. Over the next few days, Sehwan found himself deeply immersed in the grind of small-time cases under Jinwoo's guidance. It wasn't glamorous or high-profile work, but it was relentless. Sehwan quickly discovered that keeping up with Jinwoo was a test of endurance. Day after day, they pursued minor criminals, and though these were petty cases, Jinwoo approached each one with precision and focus. The other officers in the precinct noticed Sehwan's exhaustion. Whispers filled the office about the rookie returning to his desk each evening, barely able to stay awake. They couldn't help but remark on how the Phantom was putting him through his paces. Jinwoo, however, didn't see this as unnecessary. Sehwan had once mentioned catching an armed robber bare-handed, and Jinwoo found it intriguing to train someone with such potential. In the quiet shadows of the precinct, Igris, one of Jinwoo's loyal shadow soldiers, emerged briefly to offer counsel. He suggested leaving such mundane tasks to the Shadow Army, but Jinwoo, ever watchful, chose to oversee the work himself, seeing it as an opportunity for Sehwan to grow. Amid the daily grind, a more serious case came to light. A distraught woman approached the precinct, seeking help regarding her friend, who had recently died in what was ruled as a suicide. Her voice trembled with emotion as she insisted that her friend, Jinwoo, wouldn't have taken her own life. The case had already been reviewed by another detective. The evidence seemed clear. Jinwoo had been found in her bathtub, with a fatal wound on her wrist and only her fingerprints on the knife. Although she was described as a typically cheerful person, medical records confirmed a diagnosis of depression. The detective handling the case had concluded it was suicide, dismissing the friend's concerns as misplaced grief. Jinwoo listened carefully to the conversation from a distance, his sharp instincts catching subtle discrepancies. The other detective, overwhelmed by the woman's persistence, began to lose patience, his tone turning dismissive. It was then that Jinwoo made his move. Without making a sound, he approached the detective and asked to see the case file. This silent, sudden presence was why Jinwoo had earned the nickname Phantom. The detective, startled, handed over the documents, his frustration momentarily replaced by deference. Jinwoo scanned the details with a piercing gaze. On the surface, nothing seemed amiss, and he returned the file to the detective, whose confidence momentarily brightened. But then Jinwoo spoke, and his words left no room for doubt. There was more to this case. He would investigate it himself. Turning to the friend of the deceased, Jinwoo introduced himself. The woman who had been clinging to hope despite her grief looked up at him. His calm yet commanding presence seemed to assure her that, finally, someone would truly listen. In the quiet stillness of a dimly lit residence, a black shadow began to rise, its form taking shape into Sung Jinwoo. The condominium, spacious and empty, felt strangely hollow for someone who had lived alone. Traces of the previous owner lingered faintly, subtle reminders of the life that had once occupied the space. Though the night was at its darkest, darkest, Jinwoo moved effortlessly without the need for light. His enhanced senses illuminated the apartment as clearly as daylight could, until he reached the bathroom, the room where the tragedy had unfolded. The air was thick with the faint metallic scent of blood that still lingered, a chilling reminder of the final moments of Jinwoo. Jinwoo's gaze swept across the bathroom, taking in the bloodstains that painted a story of anguish and despair. For most, the dead remained silent, but for Jinwoo, the Shadow Monarch, the boundary separating life and death was one he could traverse. In the stillness, his voice echoed with an undeniable authority, a summons that the dead could not ignore. Arise. The pool of blood quivered, then erupted. From its depths emerged a shadowy figure, the silhouette of a young woman. Her form solidified, blood dripping from her hair as she gasped in confusion. Jinwoo had returned, her spirit now tethered to Jinwoo's will. She groaned faintly, her fragmented consciousness struggling to adjust. Her presence was fragile, caught between the echoes of her life and the pull of Jinwoo's dominion. Through her unspoken pain, she conveyed her answer. She had taken her own life. Jinwoo listened as she began to recount her final moments, her voice trembling under the weight of sorrow. Elsewhere in the city, a middle-aged man placed a picture frame back onto the shelf. The photo within showed a young woman with a bright smile. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell ringing late into the night. Startled, Seo made his way to the intercom. Through the screen, he saw a man dressed impeccably in a suit. The stranger raised an ID, introducing himself as Detective Sung Jinwoo from the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit. Hearing the word detective, Gyunam's heart raced with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Without hesitation, he opened the door, as he explained that he had questions about Jinwoo's death. Though disappointed to hear there were no conclusive updates, Gyunam nodded firmly. Determined to uncover the truth, he agreed to cooperate with Jinwoo. With a deep breath, he locked his door and followed the detective into the night. Sung Jinwoo and Gyunam did not head to the police station, as the grieving father had assumed. Instead, they entered a quiet nearby cafe. The atmosphere inside was calm, almost unnaturally so. Jinwoo began questioning Gyunam about Jinwoo, the young woman who had tragically ended her life. Gyunam was initially taken aback, but quickly composed himself, insisting that Jinwoo had been a kind and innocent individual, someone incapable of harboring grudges or provoking ill will. As he spoke, his voice cracked with grief, and his shoulders shook with sobs. It took him a moment to gather himself before continuing, sharing how much he had loved and cherished Jinwoo, even though she was not his biological daughter. His words were filled with sorrow and regret as he lamented not recognizing her struggles in time to help her. Reaching into his pocket, Jinwoo produced a cell phone. He explained calmly that he had discovered a voice recording left behind by Jinwoo. Without waiting for a reaction, he pressed play. The cafe filled with the sound of Jinwoo's trembling voice, recounting the horrifying abuse she had endured at the hands of her adoptive father. Her words painted a dark picture of years of torment, revealing the truth Gyunam had hidden beneath his grieving facade. She had believed she escaped his cruelty by attending a distant university, but his relentless attempts to contact her had pushed her to despair. As the recording ended, Gyunam's demeanor shifted. The sorrowful mask fell away, replaced by a hardened expression. His eyes darted toward Jinwoo, suspicious and calculating. Jinwoo's voice, calm yet commanding, laid out the man's options. Gyunam could confess his crimes and face justice, or he could suffer the consequences of his actions. For a moment, Gyunam seemed to weigh his options, but his expression betrayed a flicker of hope, a belief that he could bargain his way out of this situation. However, Jinwoo's bitter smile signaled otherwise. The world around them began to change. Gyunam's perception of the cafe warped as darkness seeped into every corner. The vibrant lights dimmed, and the background dissolved into an endless void. In this abyss, only the table and chairs remained, along with Jinwoo, whose presence now exuded an overwhelming power. Gyunam's confusion turned to fear as the weight of Jinwoo's aura bore down on him. Jinwoo's piercing gaze forced Gyunam to question his surroundings. How had he arrived here? Why was no one else in the cafe? The answers eluded him as panic set in. The void seemed to respond to Gyunam's fear. From the shadows, countless insect-like arms emerged, reaching for him with terrifying precision. His screams echoed as the claws dragged him down, tearing his body apart with a ferocity that left no doubt about Jinwoo's judgment. Blood splattered, and his agonized cries were silenced as the darkness consumed him. Jinwoo remained composed, his expression unreadable as he slowly stood. From the shadows, another figure emerged, a familiar form shrouded in gratitude. It was Jinwoo, her head bowed as she thanked Jinwoo for delivering justice on her behalf. Jinwoo met her gaze with kindness, offering offering her a moment to speak, she hesitated, considering her words carefully. After a brief pause, she made a humble request, her voice soft but resolute. The following morning, a close friend of Jinwoo arrived at the police station, her face weary and lined with concern. She sought answers, clinging to the hope that the investigation would uncover something significant. Jinwoo, however, had something for her. From behind his desk, he retrieved a small package wrapped in the cheerful paper adorned with bright designs. It was a birthday gift, one Jinwoo had purchased for her friend before her tragic end. Somehow, despite everything, it had reached the person it was meant for. Jinwoo's friend clutched the gift tightly, her emotions overwhelming her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the thoughtfulness of her late friend, even in her final moments. In that moment, Jinwoo's thoughts drifted to what might have been. If Jinwoo hadn't received those vile messages from her adoptive father, they could have been celebrating together. Instead, an hour later, Jinwoo had succumbed to despair. Later that evening, Sung Jinwoo made his way to the pork belly restaurant he often visited with Yoo Jinho. The familiar scent of grilled meat filled the air as Jinho eagerly shared his big news. He declared his intention to propose to Gina, Jinwoo's younger sister, his excitement evident in every word. With a mixture of nervousness and pride, Jinho revealed a small box from his pocket. Inside was an extravagant ring, its brilliance catching the light. He explained his plan to propose that night, asking Jinwoo for reassurance about his choice. Although Jinwoo admitted he wasn't the best judge of such things, Jinho didn't falter. Jinho continued, revealing a blueprint for a building under construction, a hospital he intended to dedicate to Gina once she completed her medical degree. Jinwoo instantly recognized the design, recalling how, in a previous timeline, Jinho had offered the same building as compensation in a deal to help him become a guildmaster. The gesture touched Jinwoo, but he reminded Jinho that material gifts weren't the key to Gina's heart. Jinho only needed to be his genuine self, as his qualities were more than enough. Overcome with emotion, Jinho's eyes brimmed with tears as he asked for a hug. Jinwoo, familiar with his friend's tendencies, tried to avoid the embrace, but Jinho, wailing persistently, managed to secure his hug. Afterward, Jinwoo returned home to his large house on the outskirts of Seoul. Though its grand size seemed out of place for a detective's salary, it raised no question since Haein, his wife, was a renowned celebrity athlete. Inside, Jinwoo was met with an amusing sight. Bellion and Igris stood in the living room, locked in a fierce, silent battle of wills. They glared at each other, their tension palpable. Haein entered the room, cradling their son, Suho, in her arms. Jinwoo's face softened as he took his son from her, gently rocking him. Suho giggled happily, wrapping his tiny arms around his father's neck. Jinwoo gestured toward the two shadow soldiers with a tilt of his chin, silently asking what their argument was about. Haein tried to suppress her laughter as Bellion and Igris began bickering about how to raise Suho. Bellion insisted that the boy should begin learning swordsmanship as soon as possible, while Igris argued that academic excellence was more crucial in the modern world. Jinwoo intervened, reminding them that Suho needed to learn to walk before tackling anything else. The soldiers' intensity dimmed, though their rivalry remained evident. As the evening settled, Haein playfully suggested that Jinwoo spend more time at home, at least until Suho took his first steps. Jinwoo smiled warmly at her request, agreeing without hesitation. The next day, Sung Jinwoo approached the chief of police's desk after being summoned. Jim Chul, sitting in his office, expressed concerns about Jinwoo's involvement in cases handled by other detectives. Though his words were diplomatic, the message was clear. Jinwoo's investigative style was causing tension among his colleagues. Jinwoo acknowledged the feedback with a polite smile, subtly reminding the chief that he was no longer a hunter, even though Jim Chul preferred to address him as such. Jim Chul then mentioned a peculiar development. The legal guardian of the woman who had recently taken her life had mysteriously vanished. Coincidentally, all the surveillance cameras near the man's home had stopped working around the same time. Jinwoo feigned surprise at this revelation, though his expression betrayed nothing. Jim Chul, trusting Jinwoo's discretion, discarded the file and moved to the real reason for their meeting. Sliding a small note across his desk, Jim Chul informed Jinwoo of the critical condition of President Go Gun-hee, a man Jinwoo respected deeply. The note contained the hospital name and room number. Jinwoo's heart sank as he read it. Later that day, Jinwoo visited the hospital. It was not his first time entering this room. Nearly a decade ago, he had stood in this very place, offering President Go the elixir of life, a miraculous potion that had extended both his mother's life and the president's. But now, fate had brought them back to the same point. Go Gun-hee lay frail on the hospital bed, his breath shallow and labored. Despite his weakened state, his eyes lit up at the sight of Jinwoo. The elder man acknowledged his presence with a faint nod, motioning for the oxygen mask to be removed. As Jinwoo carefully complied, the president president, speaking in broken breaths, revealed he had long searched for Jinwoo. He expressed gratitude for the years he had been given, years during which he had completed his life's purpose. Yet he had one last request, one not of extending his life, but of revisiting it. President Go asked Jinwoo to show him memories of the alternate timeline, a time when he had fought alongside Jinwoo against unimaginable foes. Despite Jinwoo's hesitation, aware of the painful recollections that might surface, the determination in President Go's gaze convinced him. Taking the president's frail hand, Jinwoo unlocked the dam of memories. A flood of images and emotions overwhelmed Go Gun-hee as the erased timeline became vivid once more. Tears streamed down his face as he relived the battles, the camaraderie, and the sacrifices of that forgotten era. The president's grip on his hand tightened, his sobs deepening. For a moment, the elder man seemed to relive the pride and honor of standing beside Jinwoo as a warrior. His heart swelled with joy, and his tears reflected a mix of nostalgia and contentment. Go Gun-hee turned his gaze upward, his voice barely audible but filled with peace. His final words carried the weight of a man fulfilled, one who had no regrets. With a quiet sigh, his body went still, and the steady beep of the life support machine turned into a piercing monotone. Sung Jinwoo stood silently by his side, the gravity of the moment heavy in the air. In his heart, he offered a final farewell, honoring the man who had lived as a true hero, sacrificing himself for the sake of others. With a somber expression, Jinwoo left the hospital and stepped into the bustling streets of the city. As he walked, the vibrancy of fall surrounded him, and every gust of wind sent a cascade of them to the ground. The cycle of seasons was ever present in his mind. Winter would soon arrive, and spring would inevitably follow. His phone rang, pulling him from his reverie. It was Cha Haein. Her voice, usually calm, was frantic. She spoke quickly, and Jinwoo's heart tightened at her panicked tone. Something was happening at home involving their son, Suho. His mind raced, fearing the worst, even with Bellion and Igris standing guard at the house. But the words that followed left Jinwoo momentarily stunned. Haein's disbelief was evident. Suho was flying around the house. Jinwoo's thoughts flashed to a comment Jinho had made days earlier, joking that the child of Jinwoo and Haein would probably be running the moment he was born. It seemed that Suho had surpassed even those expectations. Jinwoo couldn't help but feel an amused warmth as he reassured his wife. He promised to return home early to handle the situation, already formulating a plan to teach Suho how to control his newfound abilities. At home, the commotion continued. Bellion, ever the warrior, declared that Suho's flying meant it was time to teach him aerial combat. Igris, on the other hand, believed it signaled the makings of an excellent pilot. The two marshals debated with their usual fervor, while Haein's exasperated voice called Jinwoo to hurry back. The Queen of Ants observed her kingdom with a growing sense of despair. The once thriving colony had descended into chaos, with resources depleted and her children turning on one another for sustenance. The land could no longer sustain their lives, and she knew drastic measures were needed. She resolved to create the perfect soldier, one who could ensure the survival and dominance of her kingdom. Inside an egg, the unborn Beru listened to the Queen's voice resonating through the thick shell. Her command to fight for the kingdom and instill fear in their enemies became etched into his very being. The Queen's determination to secure her kingdom's future had given rise to a creature unlike any other, a being bred for supremacy and terror. From the moment of his birth, he understood his purpose. There was no king in this land, and so he was created to claim dominance. To any who would dare call themselves king, Beru would be their end. All living beings that crossed his path were consumed by fear, for Beru had become the apex predator. But everything changed when Beru encountered a being unlike any he had faced before, a human who did not fear him. This human's lack of terror stirred something unfamiliar within Beru. His heart, which had known only instinct and dominance, began to beat faster. For the first time, he felt something akin to curiosity. The human, however, showed no reverence. Instead, Beru sensed amusement, perhaps even mockery. It was the second time Beru had seen an emotion other than fear directed toward him. This human was different, unshaken by his overwhelming presence. Later, Beru found himself in another perplexing situation. Jinwoo's young son, Suho, had taken an unusual interest in him. No matter where Beru went or how high he flew, Suho would always follow, his bright eyes shining with fascination. The sight of the child's unwavering gaze left Beru bewildered. Why would someone so small and fragile seek him out without hesitation or fear? Confused, Beru sought guidance from Igris, hoping for an explanation. Igris, always composed, offered a simple insight. Suho was captivated by Beru's unique traits. He was an ant larger than a human, capable of walking, flying, and even speaking speaking. For a toddler, such a creature was nothing short of extraordinary. Beru pondered this revelation as he returned to the territory of the ant army. Perhaps, for the first time, he understood that not all gazes directed at him needed to be filled with fear. Instead, in the curious eyes of the young master, Beru found something he had never sought but perhaps always needed: acceptance. Beru soared silently through the skies. His destination this time was a construction site buzzing with activity. Bearded dwarves and ant soldiers toiled together, their efforts focused on crafting a massive stone statue. It was a grand representation of their monarch, a project envisioned and overseen by Beru himself. As he descended, every worker on the site paused to bow in deep respect. The elder dwarf, responsible for managing the construction, rushed forward to greet him. Beru carefully inspected the intricate work done so far, his sharp eyes catching every detail. He then shared his desire to alter part of the design. The elder hesitated, concerned about wasting their efforts, but when Beru clarified his vision, the elder saw the brilliance of the new plan. Excitement replaced hesitation as they agreed the changes would elevate the statue's magnificence. Satisfied, Beru nodded and informed the elder he had other matters to attend to, leaving the dwarves and soldiers eager to bring his revised plan to life. Meanwhile, not far away, a sinister plot was unfolding. A group of 4 burglars parked near the home of Jinwoo. Their leader, a man filled with bitterness and vengeance, gazed at the house. He believed Jinwoo was responsible for the downfall of their organization and sought to exact revenge. The plan was brutal. They would stage a break-in and leave devastation behind, targeting the family within. The burglars climbed over the wall with practiced ease, their movements silent and coordinated. But something strange happened. Though 4 men had scaled the wall, only 2 landed on the other side. Confused, the leader glanced around. One by one, his lackeys vanished without a sound. Panic began to set in, but before he could react, a hand clamped over his mouth. Beru stood before him, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the trembling man. The Grand Marshal had been guarding the house, ensuring the little master, Suho, could sleep undisturbed. Beru's keen senses picked up the soft sound of the child snoring, confirming all was well inside. The leader's eyes widened with terror as he stared at Beru. The predator's gaze bore into him, a look of cold calculation and amusement. Beru relished this moment, the familiar fear that emanated from prey in the presence of a superior being. The man's muffled screams quickly turned into silence as Beru dealt with him swiftly and efficiently. The elder stood proudly, presenting the completed statue of the monarch to Beru. Towering high into the sky, the statue was a masterpiece. Beru, gazing at the statue, felt immense satisfaction. His eyes gleamed with approval as he observed the modification he had personally suggested. On the left shoulder of the colossal statue, a smaller figure was carefully crafted. Jinwoo's son, perched like an inseparable part of his father, intended for a future when the little master might visit this place. The anticipation of their king's reaction filled Beru with amusement. A rare laugh escaped him, echoing through the space. The bearded dwarves and ant soldiers, sharing in his delight, joined in the laughter, their voices blending in harmony. The atmosphere was light-hearted, brimming with pride and joy, but the laughter was suddenly interrupted by a high-pitched, joyful shriek. Surprised, Beru turned sharply, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Standing there was Suho, his presence both unexpected and extraordinary. The toddler, unbothered by the grandeur around him, was full of energy and curiosity. Beru, ever the dutiful marshal, sighed deeply. His role as a caretaker for the child had become as challenging as it was unexpected. With a soft, resigned sound, Beru acknowledged the moment, preparing himself for the inevitable mischief the little master would bring. A few days later, Ahjin walked into the kindergarten office. Nervous but composed, she stepped inside, greeted by the director's kind demeanor. On the desk lay a sketchbook, which the director gently slid toward Ahjin. She explained that it contained drawings made by Suho. The first page revealed a child's simple drawing of an ant. At first glance, it seemed innocent, but Ahjin's confusion deepened as she wondered why this particular drawing was being shown to her. The director clarified that the class had been asked to draw a friend, and this was Suho's response. Looking closer, Ahjin noticed something odd about the ant. It was standing upright on 2 legs. That small detail was enough to make her realize who it was meant to represent: Marshal Beru. Suho had drawn his loyal, towering guardian as a friend. Turning the page, Ahjin found another drawing. This time, it was a shadowy figure, human-like but distinct, The realization made her pause, a hand instinctively coming up to her forehead. Her son had drawn another of Jinwoo's loyal shadow soldiers. As she continued to flip through the pages, each filled with similar images, Haeun's expression remained neutral, though her thoughts were racing. The director, misreading her silence, seemed to grow increasingly concerned. When the next page showed Suho's depiction of his family, Haeun's breath caught for a moment. In the drawing, there were two central figures, one male and one female, clearly representing herself and Jinwoo, but behind them stood countless black figures, shadow soldiers that Suho had always been surrounded by. The director's voice interrupted her thoughts, pointing her to the final page. The theme was home, and this, the director explained, was the main reason for the meeting. It was a drawing of a small, ordinary-looking house. Nothing unusual at first glance, but the land beneath it was completely black, covered in shadows. The director explained that when Suho was asked about the dark ground, he said it was where his friends, family, and his big dad were. Initially, the director admitted to having concerns, even suspecting possible issues at home, but Suho's consistent happiness and the lack of any troubling evidence had shifted the perspective. Instead, the director concluded that Suho might simply have a unique and imaginative way of seeing the world, even suggesting that he might possess a special talent for art. Haeun, understanding the deeper truth behind the drawings, managed a small, awkward smile. She agreed with the director, appreciating the innocent brilliance of her son while knowing the extraordinary reality he lived in. At the Central Police Station's Violent Crimes Unit, the air buzzed with excitement as promotions were announced. Among the celebratory cheers, Sung Jinwoo found himself surrounded by enthusiastic colleagues congratulating him on his new rank. Their laughter and playful demands for a celebratory drink filled the office as Jinwoo navigated the chaotic scene. Relief came in the form of his partner, Sehwan, who helped him escape the commotion. Walking side by side, Sehwan kept his tone casual but leaned closer. He wondered aloud why Jinwoo had accepted the promotion this time after refusing similar offers in the past. Jinwoo, offering only a faint chuckle, deflected with a light remark implying he no longer had a reason to say no. Sehwan laughed at the vague response, teasing Jinwoo about his lack of ambition for higher positions or wealth. Jinwoo's mind briefly wandered to a time long past, back when he and Jinho ran the Ahjin guild. At an age younger than Sehwan, he had accumulated wealth that rivaled even the largest law firms in the country. Nostalgia flickered in his thoughts, but Jinwoo said nothing, allowing the memory to remain his own. Jinwoo decided to head home earlier than usual. At home, Jinwoo found himself chuckling as he looked over Suho's drawings. His son's talent amused and impressed him in equal measure. Among the pages, one picture stood out, a detailed drawing of Beru, the ant marshal. For a 5-year-old, Suho's ability to capture the likeness of an ant standing on 2 legs was remarkable. Haeun explained what the kindergarten director had told her. Suho had said this black land was where his huge dad lived. Jinwoo couldn't suppress a quiet laugh at the description. Memories of his role as the Shadow Monarch briefly surfacing, but Haeun wasn't laughing. Her expression was pensive as she relayed another concern raised by the director. Suho's classmates seemed to fear him. The realization struck Sung Jinwoo deeply. Haeun's words replayed in his mind as she explained how the other children, despite Suho's calm demeanor, instinctively avoided him. Jinwoo couldn't dismiss this as a mere coincidence. It was a stark confirmation of the fears he had harbored. Children were innocent and instinctive, untouched by the rationalizations adults often use to suppress their feelings. Their reactions came from a place of pure perception, and in Suho, they must have sensed the overwhelming presence of the Shadow Monarch's power, an aura that hinted at death and unimaginable strength. This power, which Jinwoo had carried for so long, had now passed to his son, growing stronger with each passing day. Jinwoo understood the implications. Suho wouldn't be able to live a normal life in the human world unless he could suppress and control this power completely. Until then, drastic measures were necessary. Jinwoo's gaze fell on the pictures adorning the living room wall. At the center hung the largest frame, a photograph of their wedding day, a joyful memory preserved in time. Surrounding it were countless pictures of Suho, but most weren't ordinary family snapshots. These were images of a boy who had grown up surrounded by shadows, warriors, and creatures of immense power. He made his decision with quiet resolve. Suho would need to forget, at least for now. The boy had to learn how to coexist with humans before he could embrace the legacy of the shadows. Haeun's voice trembled slightly as she noticed Jinwoo's Jinwoo's actions, but her husband's expression left no room for doubt. He had made up his mind. Jinwoo would seal both Suho's powers and his memories of the shadow soldiers until the time was right. As Jinwoo sent the last photograph into the void, Beru emerged quietly from the shadows. The Ant Marshal had been listening and understood his king's decision. Though Beru cherished Suho deeply, he bowed his head in acceptance. The weight of parting was heavy, but Beru sought one final moment to bid farewell. Stepping cautiously into Suho's room, Beru approached the sleeping child. The steady rise and fall of Suho's breaths were like a gentle melody, soothing and pure. Beru quietly bid farewell, not just for himself, but on behalf of all the shadow soldiers who had cherished the young master. The whispers of goodbyes as the soldiers echoed their sentiments, wishing Suho health and happiness until they could meet again. With one final lingering look, Beru stepped away. Jinwoo approached his son with a heavy heart. Then, placing a hand on the boy's forehead, Jinwoo released a surge of magic. This spell would seal away the power and memories that tied Suho to the shadows, granting him a chance at a normal childhood. As he closed the door behind him, Suho drifted deeper into a dream where he danced with ants, knights, and orcs. A final, joyful memory of the world he would one day return to. High school was a jungle and the classroom was its battlefield. The law of survival governed everything. The strong ruled and the weak endured. Eunchul Lee, a high school freshman, found himself seated at the back of the classroom, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces. A new environment meant new challenges, and Eunchul was ready to assert his dominance. Among the sea of faces, one approached him with a familiar grin. Sungo Cho, a name known to Eunchul from mutual encounters in the neighboring streets. Their paths had crossed during late-night drinks with mutual acquaintances. The recognition sparked a brief exchange, but behind the casual chatter lay an unspoken tension. Both boys understood the social game they were playing. Sungo, aware of Eunchul's fearsome reputation, was quick to retreat from any confrontation, opting for an air of camaraderie. Eunchul, amused but not overly concerned, accepted the gesture, viewing Sungo as more of an ally than a rival. As Eunchul observed the classroom dynamics, one figure drew his attention. A student who exuded an odd vibe sat in his seat, detached from the bustling energy of the room. Their casual glance toward Eunchul carried a hint of indifference that felt almost provocative. The perceived slight sparked something within Eunchul, a need to re-establish his authority. The screech of Eunchul's chair being pushed back silenced the classroom. Slowly, he approached the peculiar student, intent on making his presence known. Before Eunchul could act, a hand gripped his shoulder, halting him. Startled, Eunchul turned to see Sungho, his expression tense with unspoken warning. Sungho's attempt to dissuade Eunchul only fanned the flames of his irritation. A confrontation followed. Eunchul's anger erupted, the weight of his authority pressing down on Sungho. Yet, despite the blows and bruises Eunchul inflicted, Sungho remained steadfast in his warning. The strange student, Sungho claimed, wasn't an ordinary target. He spoke of the boy's reputation, of a strength that no one could challenge in their junior high. Eunchul scoffed at the notion. How could someone like that pose a threat when they seem so unassuming? His disbelief turned into frustration as he lashed out, his emotions boiling over in the form of a stinging slap across Sungho's face. Sungho's fear wasn't directed at Eunchul. It stemmed from something far more unsettling. His trembling gaze shifted beyond Eunchul, locking onto a figure approaching from the distance. Eunchul, noticing Sungho's widened eyes, turned to see what had caught his attention. The strange student, Suho, was steadily walking toward them, his expression unreadable. Sungho immediately lowered his head, avoiding eye contact with Suho. His voice quivered as he spoke, barely audible under the tension in the air. As Suho closed the distance, he paid no attention to Eunchul's bluster. Instead, his sharp eyes scanned Sungho's battered face with disapproval, his reaction an almost silent reproach. Eunchul, confused and irritated by their exchange, barely had time to process what was happening before chaos erupted. A blur of motion shot through the air as Suho delivered a flying kick to one of Eunchul's underlings. The force sent the boy crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. Before the second underling could react, another flying kick struck him square in the face, knocking him down just as brutally. Eunchul, stunned by the sudden violence, was frozen for a moment, unable to grasp the reality of the situation. When his rage finally took hold, he swung a punch towards Suho. It was blocked effortlessly. Suho's leg shot up with inhuman precision, intercepting the blow before it landed. Then came the final strike, a devastating kick under Eunchul's chin. The sheer force lifted Eunchul off his his feet, his body crashing to the ground with an audible impact. The silence that followed was suffocating. Suho, calm and composed, glanced at Sungho as if passing the reins. Sungho, still trembling, understood the unspoken instruction. It was now his turn to step forward and take control of the narrative. Whispers began circulating through the classroom as the scene unfolded. Speculation ran rampant, painting Sungho as the unlikely hero of the encounter. His classmates marveled at his supposed skills, building an aura of mystique around him. Rumors spread quickly. They whispered that Sungho had studied judo since childhood, gaining fame in his neighborhood for his formidable talent. The classroom buzzed with admiration and envy, some students even expressing a newfound interest in learning martial arts. As the classroom emptied and students rushed home, Suho found himself alone in the silent space. The quiet was unusual, almost unnerving. A faint sense of nostalgia tickled his mind, as if he longed for the thrill of something extraordinary to happen. He moved toward the door, ready to leave, but something unexpected stopped him. The door wouldn't budge. At first, Suho thought it was locked, but even with the strength he applied, it didn't move an inch. Confusion flashed across his face. The situation grew stranger when Suho hurried to the front door of the classroom, only to find it too was immovable. His concern deepened as he rushed to the window and peered outside. What he saw was beyond belief. The world outside had frozen in time. Students stood still in mid-stride. Sports teams paused mid-action. Cars hung motionless on the road, and even a ball floated suspended in mid-air. Everything was locked in an eerie stillness. Then it happened. From the back of the classroom, a black hole appeared. At first no larger than a volleyball, it expanded rapidly, its swirling darkness pulling at the edges of reality. Soon it was large enough for a person to pass through, standing ominously in the middle of the room like a gateway to the unknown. Suho's pulse quickened, but not from fear. Deep down, he felt as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. His mother had always said he was just like his father. What would his father do now? The answer was clear in his mind. With his heart pounding like a drum, Suho stepped forward, his feet moving instinctively. He stepped through. The darkness swallowed him whole, and he emerged into an unfamiliar world. Suho found himself in a dimly lit hallway, its walls worn and ancient. The flickering glow of a single torch mounted on the wall was the only source of light. The air felt heavy, carrying an unspoken weight. Suho glanced behind him, but the way back had vanished, leaving him with only one choice: to move forward. Taking the torch from the wall, Suho held it high to illuminate the path ahead. The flames danced, casting long shadows that stretched down the corridor, making the ancient walls seem alive. Suho stepped into the dimly lit corridor, his torch illuminating rows of weapons arranged neatly along the walls. Swords, daggers, bows, spears, maces. An endless collection of armaments awaited, their gleaming edges catching the faint light. His eyes widened in awe. The sheer variety of tools for battle sent a thrill through him. Suho's heart raced as he examined each piece carefully. Why were these weapons here? The answer seemed clear. He would have to choose one. Excitement surged as Suho's gaze roamed over the displays. Each weapon seemed to call out in its own way, but his focus narrowed on a particular set of gauntlets. They stood out among the rest, their polished metal reflecting an aura of raw power. Suho approached the gauntlets, the torch in his hand momentarily forgotten as he reached out. His fingers brushed against the cold metal, and the craftsmanship sent a chill up his spine. These would be his weapon. He slid his hands into the gauntlets, clenching his fists to test their weight. At that moment, the hallway before him sprang to life. Flames roared down the walls, lighting torches in sequence and revealing a passage that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The medieval design of the corridor, complete with towering suits of armor, exuded a chilling sense of purpose. Suho stepped forward cautiously, his gauntlets glinting under the flickering torchlight. The stillness felt unnatural. As he moved, a sensation prickled at the back of his mind. Something was off. He paused and glanced over his shoulder at one of the suits of armor he had passed. It was holding its sword aloft. Suho's brow furrowed. He was certain it had been resting its blade tipped down earlier. Taking a step closer to inspect, Suho suddenly reacted. The sword slashed down. Its arc aimed straight for his head. His gauntlets intercepted it with a sharp clang, sparks flying as metal collided. The suit of armor sprang to life, dropping its weapon and lunging at him with outstretched arms. The weight of the armored figure bore down on Suho, its gauntlets closing around his neck. He retaliated with quick, forceful blows, driving his fists into the helmet with all his strength. The clanging echoed through the hall until the helmet caved and the suit crumpled to the ground. Panting, Suho staggered back, only to realize he wasn't alone. Another suit of armor stood before him, its joints creaking as it prepared to attack. Behind it, more suits were animating, their weapons gleaming ominously as they turned toward him. The corridor erupted into chaos. Suho braced himself as the suits charged. His fists flew with precision, the gauntlets crushing through helmets and breastplates. Sparks and metal shards scattered with each blow, the clangs of battle reverberating through the ancient passage. When the last suit of armor fell, Suho stood amidst the wreckage, his breaths heavy but steady. The corridor was silent again, save for the faint hum of energy in the air. A glowing message appeared before his eyes. "You have leveled up, level 19. Suho stood amidst the wreckage of the defeated living armors, a smirk of satisfaction gracing his face. His breathing, which had been heavy moments ago, was now steady, and an unfamiliar energy coursed through his body. A flicker of confusion crossed his mind on how had he managed to defeat them before leveling up. The system felt like a game, guiding him, rewarding him with increased strength after every victory. He glanced around. The hallway was empty now, and the only way forward was the massive door looming ahead. The door emanated an ominous presence, its aura heavy with the promise of something immensely powerful on the other side. Placing both hands against the heavy door, Suho pushed. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a grand lair. Suho stepped inside, his footsteps echoing against the cold stone walls. At the far end of the room stood a throne, its imposing silence dominating the space. Seated upon it was a suit of black armor, motionless yet radiating a menacing presence. Without a word, the knight unsheathed its sword, the sharp resonant sound cutting through the stillness. The weapon was as terrifying as its wielder, pulsating with a deadly aura. Suho knew hesitation would cost him dearly. If he wanted to survive, he had to strike first, but the knight moved faster. In an instant, it was upon him, its sword aglow with a brilliant light. The movement was so swift that Suho barely had time to react before the radiance consumed his vision, blinding him completely. Suho gasped and bolted upright, his chest heaving with the remnants of fear. His eyes darted around, searching for the Black Knight, but it was gone. The lair too had vanished. Instead, he found himself back where his journey had begun, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the tense confrontation moments earlier. His heart still raced as he processed the sudden change. The memory of the knight's glowing sword and the overwhelming force it carried sent a shiver through him. He thought for sure it would be the end. Weakness flooded his legs, and he sank to the ground, his body trembling. But something caught his attention. The torches at the starting point. Before, there had been 3 torches burning with blue flames. Now, one of them had gone out. Suho stared at it, realization dawning in his mind. This place wasn't random. Everything he had experienced so far, the monsters, the leveling up, the increased strength, was part of a larger system. The extinguished flames seemed to represent his chances, each one a lifeline. Suho's breathing steadied as understanding replaced fear. In this strange realm, death wasn't the end. The flames marked how many opportunities he had left. But what would happen if all 3 were extinguished? The thought sent a chill down his spine, and he quickly resolved not to find out. He couldn't afford to waste another chance. Just as he braced himself, it happened again. He was back where it all began. Only one torch remained, flickering faintly against the oppressive darkness. Suho groaned in frustration, rolling across the ground as anger boiled within him. The sting of defeat wasn't from physical pain, but from losing yet another precious chance. The Black Knight was far too powerful. The gap between them felt insurmountable, like an impossible challenge. It felt as though the trial itself was unfair, stacking the odds relentlessly against him. After venting his frustration, Suho pushed himself to his feet, his gaze sharpening as he looked at the weapons. With renewed determination, he armed himself with every weapon available. This time, he would move forward with caution and purpose. As his eyes drifted toward the pathway, he saw the suits of armor once again standing in their places, silently guarding the same spots as before. It was as if nothing had changed. He sighed heavily, observing the monsters for a moment longer. Then a thought struck him. When had the armor monsters returned? They were clearly back in their original positions, but how had they reappeared? Suho's eyes narrowed as a possibility crossed his mind. What if they didn't respawn because he returned to the starting point, but instead because enough time had passed? His heart began to race at the thought. He decided to test his theory. Rising with a renewed sense of determination, he turned his attention to the armored monsters near the entrance. Without hesitation, he launched himself into the fray, his movements sharp and precise. Each strike from his blade cut through the air with purpose, and the suited beast fell as his sword drove deep into its head. Another enemy readied its bow, the string taut as it prepared to fire an arrow. But Suho's speed was unmatched. He closed the distance in an instant. His powerful punch collided with the monster, sending it hurtling out of sight, its defeat swift and absolute. The battlefield quieted. Suho stood victorious as no enemies remained before him. A notification flashed before his eyes, announcing his progress. progress. He had reached the required level for a player. A new quest appeared with a simple prompt: accept or deny. Without hesitation, Suho accepted. As if on cue, a fresh wave of armored beasts materialized, their approach marked by a thunderous march. The ground shook with their presence, and Suho's grin widened. The challenge invigorated him. Alongside the armored beasts, mages emerged, their hands glowing with the intensity of magic. They unleashed a storm of blazing fire, the spells lighting up the battlefield with an otherworldly glow. Suho braced himself, his instincts guiding him. The firestorm engulfed the area, but Suho remained unfazed. His body moved as if on autopilot, driven by the thrill of battle and his unyielding will. He tore through his opponents one by one with devastating efficiency. Each swing of his blade and every blow he delivered was precise, leaving no room for error. The armored beasts and mages fell in his wake, their once imposing forms reduced to nothing. When the last monster was defeated, a series of notifications appeared, listing his rewards: a guard's necklace, the highest grade mage's ring, and a burning battle demon's gauntlet. Suho held the items in his hands, feeling the immense power coursing through him. It was unlike anything he had experienced before, a strength that filled him with confidence and determination. Without pause, Suho turned his gaze toward the massive doors leading to the Black Knight's lair. Pushing the heavy doors open once more, he entered to find the Black Knight seated on its throne. The knight didn't move, but its presence alone was overwhelming, the air thick with tension. It was a silent challenge, a call to battle that Suho accepted without hesitation. The Black Knight unsheathed its blade, and the faint crackle of energy around it hinted at the devastating force it wielded. Suho's lips curved into a confident smile. The ground beneath him trembled slightly as he released all his mana. The distance between them was roughly 30 meters. Suho prepared himself, focusing intently as his senses heightened. Time seemed to slow as his surroundings became sharper, clearer. He could now see the intricate motion of the knight's sword, which was coated in a lethal blue lightning. This was the attack that had ended their previous battles in an instant. But now, Suho's agility and perception, honed to their peak, allowed him to track the movement. The lightning crackled as it surged toward him, but with a precise step forward, he dodged it. Despite the knight's rapid movements, Suho stepped in closer, his gauntleted fist tightened. The knight's energy crackled in response, as if tensing under the threat of Suho's power. Suho struck with precision and overwhelming strength. His gauntlet connected with the Black Knight's armor, and the sheer force sent the knight flying backward. The Black Knight's composure faltered for only a moment before he raised his sword once more and charged at Suho. Suho's reflection glimmered on the weapon's surface as he raised his fist, ready to meet the attack head on. With a swift and decisive motion, his fist swung forward, delivering a devastating blow to the knight's chest. The impact was explosive, sending the knight crashing into a pillar with such force that cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. Suho didn't let up. A relentless barrage of punches followed, each strike carrying raw power and precision. The knight struggled to keep up, barely managing to block the rapid onslaught, but the force behind each strike was overwhelming. Piece by piece, the Black Knight's armor began to shatter under the pressure. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't block every attack. Suho's power was undeniable, a testament to his growing strength and determination. The knight's weapon, once a formidable blade, finally gave way. The sword cracked and then shattered, its pieces scattering to the ground. It was over. The Black Knight, known as Igris, felt the weight of his defeat sink in, yet in his heart, there was no bitterness. Instead, there was a profound admiration for Suho's skill and potential. In Suho's strikes, Igris saw a shadow of his king, Sung Jinwoo. It was clear now, the young master, even without reaching his full potential, had inherited a legacy of unmatched power. Born to a godlike father and a mother who had been an S-rank awakened being, Suho's potential surpassed imagination. With his armor falling apart and his sword destroyed, Igris knew the battle had reached its conclusion. Suho, however, prepared for one final strike. Drawing mana into his fist, the energy radiated outward in powerful waves. The ground trembled as Suho unleashed the final blow. His fist struck with earth-shattering force, piercing through the Black Knight's stomach and leaving a massive hole. The impact sent Igris crashing into the pillar, where he slowly slid to the ground, motionless. Finally, he exhaled a long-held breath, a mix of relief and triumph washing over him. He had done it. He had defeated an opponent he once believed to be invincible. A deep sense of joy filled his chest, a hard-won victory against overwhelming odds. Suho's gaze swept across the room, his eyes catching a glimmer of something new. At the base of a staircase near the throne, a newly spawned gate shimmered ominously. His heart raced at the sight, and his eyes widened in realization. This had to be the exit. Relief flooded him as he thought perhaps this strange and grueling adventure was finally coming to an end, though its purpose still eluded him. Without hesitation, determination, he sprinted toward the gate, driven by hope and anticipation. Darkness enveloped him once more as he traveled through the tunnel, just like the one that had brought him into this place. When he opened his eyes on the other side, Suho's breath hitched. The sound hit him first, piercing, ear-splitting screeches that reverberated through the air. Before him stood an unsettling sight: humanoid ants, their bodies as large as humans, screaming in unison. Despite his childhood fondness for ants and his careful attempts never to harm them, he now regretted those sentimental feelings as a fierce battle raged on, leaving Suho struggling to steady his breath. Compared to these monsters, the armored creatures he had fought earlier seemed almost manageable. But even amidst the chaos, Suho found a small silver lining. Each victory against these ants made him stronger. His level was rising again, quickly and steadily, with every battle. The screams of the defeated echoed endlessly, blending with the sound of Suho's determined strikes. After what felt like an eternity, the leveling finally stopped. Suho found himself standing before the last room of the cavern. It was a massive, hollow chamber that exuded an ominous presence. The air was heavy, and Suho's raised perception allowed him to see through the dim light. The size of the lair unnerved him. If the room was this enormous, how large would the creature residing within be? A chill ran down his spine, but he pressed forward. At the far end of the chamber stood a single humanoid ant. Its back was turned to Suho, and unlike the others, it bore a pair of wings. Something felt off. He couldn't sense its power level. Unlike the Black Knight, whose strength had been immediately overwhelming, this creature was an enigma. The ant's gaze pierced through the tension of the lair, its appearance unsettling yet strangely sorrowful. As the two locked eyes, Suho noticed something peculiar. The ant seemed to be crying. Thick glistening tears rolled down its chitinous face. But before Suho could react, the winged ant surged forward. In an instant, it grew twice its original size, towering over him like a shadow of doom. Then came the roar, an ear-splitting cry that seemed to shake the very foundation of the lair. The sound echoed with raw fury, and Suho braced himself for the fight of his life. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. The winged ant proved to be an incredible adversary, its movements impossibly fast and its strikes devastating. Yet Suho noticed something strange. Despite its overwhelming strength, the ant seemed to hold back at key moments, hesitating when it could have delivered fatal blows. This hesitation, however subtle, gave Suho the sliver of opportunity he needed. After what felt like an eternity of exchanging blows, Suho finally emerged victorious. Exhausted, he collapsed to the ground, his body aching from the relentless combat. The winged ant, once a towering menace, lay defeated before him. As he sat up and caught his breath, Suho's eyes caught the shimmering outline of a new gate. It was his reward for overcoming the challenge, a promise of the end to this arduous trial. His heart swelled with anticipation as he checked his level, 99. A perfect number, the peak of what most would consider ultimate strength. Believing his adventure was finally over, Suho stepped eagerly through the gate. The swirling darkness engulfed him, and he closed his eyes, ready to return home. But when his vision cleared, his heart sank. Before him stretched a terrifying new landscape filled with colossal figures. Giants loomed in the distance, their monstrous forms moving with an air of dominance. Around them, massive dragons prowled the skies, their roars shaking the ground. Suho's heart pounded as he took in the sight. Relief was quickly replaced by dread. His journey was far from over. It was one thing after another. Suho made mountains of the corpses of giants and dragons, piling them up as he made his way down a path through a large field. Suho's journey in the mysterious realm reached an intense turning point as a familiar presence emerged. Beru, the mighty shadow soldier, appeared once again. This time, Beru radiated an unparalleled aura, his form immaculate and commanding. Without hesitation, the battle began. Beru launched himself at Suho with terrifying speed, his movements precise and lethal, but Suho was ready, countering with a flying kick that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Before Suho could catch his breath, another challenger emerged. Jima, another of the loyal shadow soldiers. Jima exuded fierce determination, a reflection of his unyielding loyalty. His movements were sharp and deliberate, displaying the hard work and devotion he had poured into serving their liege, even if his efforts had long been forgotten. Suho gritted his teeth, delivering blow after blow, yet the shadow soldiers seemed endless. Frustration welled within him as he realized his stamina was dwindling. He knew he had to refine his attacks, to control his strength with absolute precision. Each strike had to count. Every move had to conserve energy. Channeling Channeling his resolve, Suho unleashed a ferocity unlike anything he had shown before. His strength became a tidal wave of destruction, scattering shadow soldiers as if they were leaves in a storm. His power surged, making him an unstoppable force. Just as the tide of battle seemed to calm, another figure emerged from the shadows. Tusk, the mighty shaman, wielding his staff like a weapon of ultimate destruction. Yet even the formidable Tusk failed to shake Suho. With an air of dominance, Suho dismantled his opponent with a single devastating attack. Tusk's presence, once intimidating, was reduced to fragments scattered across the battlefield. Standing near the glowing gate that signified the path forward, Suho reflected on his growth. Although his stats hadn't increased, he had gained something far more valuable, the ability to control his immense strength with precision. Every battle, every challenge, had honed him into a fighter who could wield his power with unmatched proficiency. Continuing along the dimly lit path, Suho's footsteps echoed as he encountered yet another Black Knight. This one was unlike any he had faced before. Its frame was massive, its back marked by broken wings, scars that hinted at a history of fierce battles. This knight radiated power and presence, far surpassing even the winged ant from before. As Suho prepared for the fight, he couldn't ignore a sinking realization. Despite defeating countless enemies, the knight revealed a shocking truth. The army Suho had faced so far was merely a fraction, a mere 1/3000th of the entire force. The weight of the knight's revelation struck Suho like a boulder, but it didn't slow him down. Instead, it fueled a fire deep within him, a relentless determination to uncover the truth and fight his way forward. Clenching his armored fists, Suho braced himself, ready to face the powerful knight. Bellion, the towering figure before him, stepped forward. With a calm but commanding presence, he unsheathed his sword. His voice carried a strange sense of pride as he acknowledged Suho as the Vice Lord. As the clash began, Suho met Bellion's oncoming strikes with his own fierce punches. Each blow was precise, every movement deliberate. The battlefield echoed with the sound of metal against metal, the ground beneath them trembling from the force of their attacks. Despite the chaos, Suho's thoughts raced. The title Vice Lord puzzled him. Why was he called that? What did it mean? His fists flew faster, fueled by questions he couldn't suppress. His left hook connected with staggering force, but Bellion was unshaken. Suho's right fist followed with even more power as he pushed forward, determined to find answers through strength. The battle was relentless, their strikes evenly matched. But suddenly, Bellion unleashed his sword's true form. The blade transformed into a massive whip-like weapon, its segmented body raining down destruction with deadly precision. Each swing shattered the battlefield, sending debris flying in all directions. Suho's movements became sharper, his reflexes quicker, dodging each strike with precision as if his life depended on it, which it did. In the midst of the chaos, Suho noticed the unique nature of the weapon. It was both a sword and a whip, versatile yet dangerous. But this adaptability came with a flaw. Suho saw his opening and grabbed onto the segmented blade, stopping its relentless assault. With the weapon momentarily neutralized, Suho seized the opportunity and lashed out with a flying kick aimed directly at Bellion's face. Bellion reacted swiftly, raising both arms to block the attack. Suho, however, was already moving. He closed the distance in an instant, using Bellion's defensive stance against him. With his adversary's arms guarding his face, Suho aimed his next attack at the exposed target, Bellion's midsection. His punch landed with devastating force, sending Bellion hurtling backward. The massive figure crashed into the ground, breaking the asphalt and kicking up a cloud of dust. As the dust settled, Suho stood firm, his breathing steady despite the intensity of the fight. He knew this wasn't the end. Bellion's strength was too great to be defeated by a single blow, no matter how powerful. Suho's eyes remained sharp, ready for the next move. This was no ordinary battle. It was a clash of will and strength, one that could last an entire day if neither of them faltered. But despite the knight's overwhelming presence, Suho felt something strange. This wasn't the real threat. He was certain of it. The true danger lingered above. With a growing sense of dread, Suho tilted his head back and looked up. High in the sky, a massive wyvern soared, its piercing cry echoing through the air. The beast's cry was sharp and commanding, a harbinger of what was to come. Moments later, a shadow detached itself from the wyvern's back and began to descend. The figure fell with incredible speed, landing with a deafening thud that cracked the ground beneath them. Dust exploded outward, obscuring the figure's form. With incredible speed, Suho launched himself forward, his movements faster than sound. In an instant, he was right in front of the hooded figure who gripped twin daggers tightly. He unleashed a flurry of punches, each strike calculated to land with devastating precision. The hooded figure moved with a grace that defied logic, effortlessly evading every one of Suho's attacks. It wasn't just his speed, it was as if he could see his intentions before he acted, avoiding his punches with the smallest tilt of their head. Suho's relentless barrage, driven driven by fury and determination, failed to land even a single blow. The battlefield crackled with tension as the clash intensified. Suho's attacks were a storm of raw power, yet they were met with a calm and calculated precision. He watched in awe, realizing just how extraordinary his opponent was. Each movement of the hooded figure was deliberate, every strike imbued with masterful technique. This wasn't just strength, it was skill honed through countless battles and unimaginable hardships. Dropping to his knees, Suho felt the weight of his inadequacy pressing down on him, but he refused to accept defeat. His spirit burned brighter as he launched himself again with renewed determination. His body, trained to its limits, moved with speed and precision. Even though his opponent's stats and abilities were far superior, Suho believed in his own growth, in the strength he had painstakingly earned through his trials. But then, the hooded figure unsheathed a dagger, its aura radiating an otherworldly power. The atmosphere shifted, and Suho's pulse quickened. He charged forward, giving everything he had. His strikes were powerful, yet his target seemed untouchable. Each attack met only empty air. The figure moved effortlessly, a step ahead of Suho at every turn. With a sickening crack, Suho's weapon shattered in his grasp, leaving his hands bloodied and trembling. Pain seared through his body, but his resolve remained unshaken. He launched himself again, determined to overcome this seemingly insurmountable foe. Despite his injuries, Suho fought on, driven by a growing respect for his opponent. He couldn't help but admire the strength and skill of the hooded figure. If he could become even a fraction as powerful, he thought, it would be worth every ounce of his effort. Suddenly, the hooded figure placed a hand on Suho's head. The movement was swift but gentle, carrying an air of finality. Time seemed to slow in that instant. Suho, still brimming with defiance, caught a glimpse of the face beneath the hood. Recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning. The face, the presence, and the voice. It was someone he could never forget. A mixture of shock and realization filled his gaze. Then, with a smile that carried both pride and understanding, the figure moved with unimaginable speed. His hand struck, pushing Suho with a force that propelled him toward the glowing gate. The brilliance of the gate enveloped him, and in that blinding light, Suho felt his entire being consumed. As the world dissolved into radiance, Suho's thoughts swirled. He wasn't defeated. This was another step, another lesson. The last image burned into his mind was the knowing smile of his father, Jinwoo, and the overwhelming sense of strength he had yet to achieve. Then there was only light. Suho jolted awake, sitting upright in his chair with a sharp gasp. His surroundings came into focus. The familiar classroom, bathed in the warm hues of the setting sun. The air was quiet and still, a stark contrast to the intensity of the dream that had gripped him moments before. His heart pounded as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. The dream lingered vividly in his mind, strange and unsettling. It felt like an elaborate dungeon crawl straight out of a video game, culminating in an impossible final boss. His own father. The thought made him cringe inwardly. Suho dismissed the bizarre imagery with a shake of his head, relieved it had only been a dream. As his breathing steadied, Suho's attention shifted to the room. A faint movement caught his eye, and he turned to see a female classmate standing nearby. She was frozen in place, her expression one of startled surprise. She finally explained that she was in charge of locking up the classroom for the week. Suho's posture relaxed as he considered the situation. A brief silence stretched between them before he offered to help with the task. The girl blinked, clearly surprised by the unexpected gesture. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded shyly. Together, they moved to complete the mundane task. Though small, the interaction was a fleeting yet grounding moment in Suho's day, pulling him further from the surreal haze of his dream. On the rooftop of the school, Jinwoo stood with Beru and Igris, the trio gazing over the campus below. Each of them carried their own thoughts, though their presence together signified a deeper bond formed through years of loyalty and trust. Igris, ever the honorable knight, broke the silence with a proposal that had clearly been on his mind. He suggested restoring Suho's power, pointing out the young master's remarkable progress and determination. Jinwoo, however, had a different perspective. He reflected on his own journey, a path forged through trials far more grueling than Suho could yet imagine. Jinwoo recalled the battles that had shaped him, the times when strength alone wasn't enough. He had learned that true power wasn't about rushing into fights recklessly. It was about knowing when to retreat, to reassess, and to grow. Jinwoo wanted Suho to learn this lesson for himself. No matter how admirable his son's courage was, acting without strategy or self-awareness was a dangerous flaw. Suho needed time, and Jinwoo was willing to give him that. Beru, ever the emotional one, stood nearby clutching the sketchbook that held the portrait Suho had drawn of him. His glowing eyes brimmed with tears as he admired the drawing, his loyalty and affection for the young master evident in every trembling movement. Jinwoo, understanding the sentiment behind Beru's emotions, patted him gently on the shoulder, offering quiet reassurance. From his vantage vantage point, Jinwoo's gaze fall to the school grounds below. His sharp eyes caught sight of Suho walking toward the school gates, accompanied by a girl from his class. His son was growing, both as a person and as a warrior, even if he wasn't ready yet to fully embrace the power waiting for him. Lost in thought, he murmured to himself, perhaps it was time to gather everyone together and enjoy a simple meal as a family. It had been too long since they'd shared such a quiet joy. In the bustling office of the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit, a television broadcast filled the air, detailing the arrest of the infamous swindler brothers, Dong-suk and Hwang Dong-soo. The story had captivated the nation. Far away from the quiet office, soot and exhaustion marked the aftermath of a hard-fought victory against nature. Baek, along with his fellow firefighters, had battled through the night to extinguish a massive wildfire threatening a residential area. It had taken over 800 firefighters, more than 50 fire trucks, and aerial support to bring the inferno under control. The cost had been high in effort, but there was relief in their success. No lives had been lost, and no injuries were reported, a feat almost miraculous given the fire's scale. Baek surveyed the scene around him. His team, drained but victorious, rested where they could, some lying on the ground, others sharing smiles or gesturing thumbs up. Their camaraderie was a testament to their shared triumph. Baek, though equally exhausted, found himself buoyed by the sense of accomplishment. When Captain Ilwan Sung approached, offering a cold bottle of water, it was a small yet significant gesture of gratitude and camaraderie. Ilwan Sung was a legend among firefighters, revered for his leadership and countless victories against impossible odds. For Baek, being on the same team as someone so respected was a point of pride. A cold breeze swept through the gathering of firefighters, easing the heat of the night's work. The moment felt surreal, a quiet pause in the aftermath of chaos, filled with unspoken stories and a bond that needed no words. On the top floor of a towering skyscraper, inside a sleek and modern meeting room, Yoo Jin-ho entered with an air of excitement barely concealed behind his professional demeanor. An employee walked beside him, persistently discussing the importance of choosing the perfect title for their upcoming game. But Jin-ho's thoughts were far from the conversation. His mind swirled with an overwhelming joy, a happiness so profound it was hard to keep contained. As he stepped into the office, his emotions became impossible to suppress. His voice rang out, filled with pride and excitement. His wife was 6 weeks pregnant. The words echoed, carrying the joy that radiated from him. The reaction was instant. Cheers erupted, and congratulations filled the air as his team celebrated the wonderful news. Jin-ho moved through the room, exchanging high fives with his colleagues, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. In the midst of the celebration, a spark of inspiration struck Jin-ho. With newfound confidence, he declared the name for their new game, Beautiful World. His declaration was met with hesitation from the employees, who quickly voiced their concerns. The stakes for this project were high. This game had the potential to define the future of Ahjin software. They urged Jin-ho to reconsider, fearing that such a whimsical name might not resonate with the market. But Jin-ho was unmoved. In his mind, the world truly was beautiful. Even the triviality of naming the game felt less like a burden and more like a delightful challenge. If it proved too difficult, perhaps he would ask Jinwoo, the one man he admired most, for help with something even more important, naming his child. The employee's worry began to ease when Jin-ho revealed a vital piece of information. The company had already secured a major investor, someone so influential that his involvement all but guaranteed success. Choi Jong-in, the top figure in their industry, had decided to back Ahjin software. The employees erupted in celebration, their earlier skepticism swept away by the promise of opportunity. Far away in the chairman's office of Eugene Construction, Yoo Myung-hun, Jin-ho's father, sat surrounded by neatly folded newspapers. The quiet snip of scissors filled the air as he clipped articles about his son's latest achievements. The headline spoke of Jin-ho's success as the head of a thriving game development company, a young entrepreneur who had carved his own path by rejecting the family business. Myung-han's expression betrayed a mix of pride and frustration. His son's decision to establish a gaming company still baffled him, but the results were undeniable. He closed the scrapbook with a sigh, glancing at his secretary, Kim, who held another stack of papers. Myung-han's thoughts turned to his family. Despite his reservations about Jin-ho's choices, one desire lingered in his heart: to see his grandchild soon. The gates were a mystery to all who encountered them, portals to the unknown that evoked fear in even the bravest. No one could predict what horrors or challenges lay beyond. People trembled at the mere thought of their appearance, whispering silent prayers for them to remain closed. Yet there were those who defied that fear, stepping boldly into the abyss to confront the dangers within. These individuals were called hunters. At the Hunter Association's support department, a frustrated call echoed through the office. The voice on the line belonged to an irate hunter, his tone sharp and accusatory. He lashed out about the repeated inclusion of a specific team member, a weakling named Sung, whose incompetence was a liability to the entire team. The caller's anger was palpable, fueled by fear and frustration at having to risk not only his own life, but those of his team members due to an administrative error. He threatened to resign if such mistakes persisted. The employee on the other end of the line tried to remain composed, offering apologies and requesting details about the incident. However, the employee's thoughts drifted as the tirade continued. These situations were a regular occurrence in the support department, a reminder of the complexities of working with hunters. Among students, career aspirations often revolved around three prestigious roles: becoming a famous hunter, joining a powerful guild, or securing a job within the Hunter Association. Yet the reality of working behind the scenes in the association was far from glamorous. For employees in support roles, it meant dealing with an endless stream of complaints, excuses, and demands from hunters. The employee recalled the variety of justifications hunters would offer to avoid their responsibilities. Some lamented the lack of coffee and snacks provided before raids, comparing their treatment unfavorably to other neighborhoods. Others asked for advances on their pay, citing vague emergencies. A few even requested babysitting services for their children while they were out risking their lives in the gates. The monotony of these administrative tasks weighed heavily on the employee. It was a thankless job, navigating the demands of individuals whose bravery often came with an inflated sense of entitlement. The employee recalled the caller's frustration, the name Sung Jinwoo echoing in his mind. Curiosity got the better of him as he typed the name into the system. The results displayed a grim picture. Jinwoo's rank was E, the lowest possible. His mana levels barely registered, and his stats were indistinguishable from those of an ordinary person. Yet his records told a different story: frequent injuries, near-death experiences, and a survival rate that seemed more like a miracle than a pattern. As the employee dug deeper, the details of Jinwoo's life began to unravel. Jinwoo was 23, 6 years younger than himself, but already burdened with responsibilities far beyond his age. His mother was bedridden in the ICU, trapped in an eternal slumber, while his younger sister was still a high school student. The weight of his circumstances left little doubt as to why Jinwoo continued to risk his life in the gates despite his evident vulnerabilities. The employee turned to his senior, voicing his concern. Shouldn't the association step in and stop Jinwoo from continuing as a hunter? But the senior's response was disheartening. They had already tried. Jinwoo's resolve was unshakable. Curiosity led the senior to question the employee's own motivations. Why had he joined the Hunter Association? The employee hesitated, then admitted it was a childhood memory that had inspired him. A news report had shown a hunter sacrificing himself to save his comrades, ultimately getting trapped in the process. That act of selflessness had sparked a question in his young mind. Who saves the saviors? He had resolved to be the one who could make a difference, helping hunters avoid injury and death, even if only from behind the scenes. The senior posed a thought-provoking question. Was it truly about convincing Jinwoo to quit, or was there another way to help him? The employee chuckled softly, realizing how powerless he felt. Beyond recommending Jinwoo give up this dangerous path, what else could he do? But the senior suggested an alternative. Some individuals with high-rank abilities chose not to become hunters, uninterested in fame or fortune. Perhaps these people could be persuaded to support those like Jinwoo, who braved the gates despite their limitations. The employee reviewed a file his senior handed over. It was about Lee Ju-hee, a B-rank healer with exceptional abilities but a deep fear of the dangers that came with being a hunter. She had refused the hunter's path despite her potential. Comparing her fear to Jinwoo's courage, the employee began to understand. While Jinwoo transformed fear into bravery, someone like Ju-hee could be the strength to support the weak. Encouraged, the senior asked if the employee would take on this challenge. Reflecting on the possibility of even a small contribution to Jinwoo's journey beyond the gates, the employee resolved to act. Every little bit of support could make a difference, and he was determined to try. On a calm street bathed in the gentle afternoon light, Suho walked alongside the girl from his class. Today, their conversation carried an amusing challenge. The matter at hand was deciding who would carry both their backpacks. The chosen method, a simple game of rock, paper, scissors. Facing each other with playful determination, they counted down. Hands moved in sync as they called out the rhythm, and the decisive moment arrived. The girl emerged victorious, her face lighting up with satisfaction. She handed her backpack to Suho with a triumphant smile, and Suho, chuckling at his loss, slung it over his shoulder without protest. The girl teased him lightly about his poor luck at the game, while Suho laughed along, showing no hard feelings. But as they continued, Suho suddenly paused mid-step. His attention was drawn upward, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of the sky. The girl noticed his sudden halt and instinctively followed his line of sight. But the sky offered nothing unusual, just soft clouds drifting lazily across the blue canvas. For a moment, Suho remained silent, his expression distant yet calm. It was as if he were searching for something beyond the reach of his eyes, a feeling lingering just out of grasp. The sun bathed the sky in a golden hue as Jinwoo and Ahjin soared high above the world, riding atop Kaisel, the mighty flying dragon. The rush of wind carried them higher with each powerful beat of Kaisel's wings, lifting them into a serene expanse where the horizon stretched endlessly. From this vantage point, the view was breathtaking, a canvas of vibrant colors and boundless skies. Jinwoo took a moment to glance at Ahjin, her eyes sparkling as they reflected the sunlight. A warmth filled his chest as he reached into his pocket, revealing a gift he had carefully prepared for their 16th wedding anniversary. It was a stunning necklace, crafted by the skilled hands of bearded dwarves, imbued with a timeless beauty. As Jinwoo gently clasped it around Ahjin's neck, the sunlight danced across its surface, creating a radiant glow that matched her smile. Their moment together felt suspended in time, a delicate memory etched against the vastness of the sky. As they leaned closer, ready to seal the moment with a kiss, Jinwoo's gaze shifted to the horizon, his expression growing resolute. It was time. Ahjin, understanding the unspoken words, left Kaisel with a lingering smile. The dragon turned and flew back toward Earth, carrying her away. Jinwoo stood motionless as the distance between them grew, watching until she was but a speck against the brilliant backdrop. When he turned, the peaceful skies fractured, a part of space twisted unnaturally, rippling as if reality itself had been torn. Blue fog poured out of the distortion, swirling and condensing into a form. Jinwoo recalled the warning given to him long ago. Beings of immense power could draw horrors from other dimensions, like moths to a flame. As his shadow army materialized behind him, unwavering in their loyalty, Jinwoo smiled. His voice was calm but commanding as he summoned them into action. Shadows erupted into motion as the timeless word resonated: arise. Meanwhile, far away in a secluded realm, Suho stood within a foreboding lair. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him as he faced yet another defeat. His body trembled, but his determination remained unbroken. Despite countless failures, Suho refused to yield. Yet deep within, a voice called out, a voice that had haunted him since he first arrived. It whispered a single word that echoed through his soul: arise. Suho clenched his fists, his resolve reigniting. This was his final chance, a single opportunity to push past his limits and claim strength beyond his imagination. Whatever awaited him beyond that door, he was ready to face it head on. No matter how many times he had fallen, Suho's heart surged with unyielding determination. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but Suho stepped forward, ready to challenge his destiny. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.